Alright, so I'm back with another Road to 2200 Rapid game, and in this video I'm actually going to be going over two games because one of them is terrible, and I think I forgot to take the game seriously, and the second game is actually pretty good. So let's just jump into this first game. I was facing a 2269 National Master, and unfortunately I think I forgot that I'm supposed to be taking this series seriously, and this game was just awful. So let's just jump right in. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, c6, and then after pawn to e3, he goes f5. So he's got this Dutch stonewall structure here, putting all his pawns on light squares. Very solid structure. And I chose to play the move g4 here. Now, this is probably not the best idea, considering I've never studied any of this theory. I guess the chess.com Explorer calls it the Portish Gambit and the Queen's Gambit decline, but I've actually never really studied it. I kind of just have played a bunch of Dutch systems where you play it in this particular line, or in general lines, but not this particular line. So I kind of just ripped it without even thinking, which is probably not the way to go. And he takes on g4, which means he probably doesn't know what he's doing either, because the engine gives a pretty solid advantage after queen takes g4. But that isn't really what I had in mind here. I was going to play pawn to h3 and just gambit a pawn and just open up the whole king side, maybe look to castle queen side. Once again, no idea what I'm doing in this opening. So I kind of just was going with it, just playing something different, get an original position. But the engine doesn't really like him taking on h3. And after knight takes h3, once again, the evaluation goes up a pretty good bit, like 1.2. And the idea is I really have this knight jumping into a good square. Maybe my bishop can come into the game. My rook has got a nice semi-open file. My queen can potentially come in. So I think maybe taking on h3 is kind of a mistake by him. And he shouldn't have allowed me to open up so many lines. But he goes knight f6. I go knight f4. Once again, I think knight g5 is probably better. Knight f4, bishop d6, and I go knight to h5. So kind of a key moment here. I think knight g6 would be a very good move, taking advantage of this pin along the h file. And I think he'd have to go rook to g8 there, and he wouldn't be able to castle. So I think that would probably be a better idea. But knight h5, pawn to g6, we have a trade, and I go f4. So this is actually a pretty good move because black's best pawn break here is really to play e5. And when I go f4, I kind of clamp down on this e5 square, so e5 is not really possible unless he's planning on giving up a pawn. The downside is I am weakening my king a little bit, but it should be okay in the meantime. He goes knight d7, and then I just proceed to completely collapse my position. c5 is a terrible positional move. I should maintain the tension. Here I should probably play bishop d2, maybe queen c2 and look to castle queenside, but c5 is not really the way to play because he can look to undermine this pawn structure right away. So once again, I should probably go bishop d2, but I go bishop d3, b6, and then probably should take on b6 because b4 is not really a solid construction here. Now, I thought that a5 would be a pretty good move for him. So it actually is not that great because I have pawn to b5 here. But I had a complete mental lapse on this move and during most of this game and just chose to take on a5. And that was not good. But b5 makes a lot more sense because if you take here, then knight takes b5, hit the bishop on c7. It's not very desirable for him. Bishop d8 allows knight d6 check. Maybe c6 is coming. Can't really take on b5. If you take on c5, I'll take on c6, hitting your knight. So I think b5 would have been a much, much better option. But in the game, I played b takes a5 because I wasn't thinking. B takes c5 was played. Bishop to b2. Just looking to kind of develop my pieces, maybe put this bishop on the long diagonal. He takes on d4 and knight to e2. So I'm trying to take advantage of this pin, but my position is just like completely collapsing here. My king is stuck in the center. My pawns are just super unstable. And I really just don't think that this position is going to pan out against a national master. He'll probably play pretty solid moves and convert this. So bishop takes a5, king f1, c5, e takes d4, c4. So this bishop is no longer very useful along this diagonal now that this pawn is stuck here. Bishop c2, black castles. I go king g2. Somehow I felt like my king was safer on g2 since it wasn't on this file, but you know, my king has absolutely no support around it really. It's kind of just out in the open. So this is really not ideal here, and I'm down 2 pawns, and I think my position is far inferior at this point. c3, bishop a3, rook f7, bishop d6, looking to hang on to this pawn, maybe wedge with bishop e5, but really just trying to get my bishop into the game, trying to create counterplay any way I can. Bishop to a6 was played. I go knight g3, bishop to b6, targeting this pawn on d4, and I go queen to g4. So you should probably just take this pawn right here. It's kind of just a free pawn. Instead he goes e5, trying to complicate things. He's threatening to take my bishop here, and if I play bishop takes e5, knight takes e5 is just going to lead to a very good position for him. If f takes e5, there's queen f2 check. Now on d takes e5, queen takes f4, and this is just going to be leading to a much better position for him, much better endgame if I choose to simplify. I just kind of running out of pieces at that point. So after e5, I should go knight f5, which is the, I guess, critical move, taking advantage of this pin here and threatening knight h6 check. But unfortunately I missed it, and I played d takes e5, and then after some forced simplifications, my position is just not going to be good enough here. I try to get some counterplay with this pawn, but it's not going to be enough. Knight f6, rook f1, the trades. Bishop d4 was kind of the last chance that I have to kind of complicate things. I guess rook f4 is a pretty decent move, kind of taking advantage of this. But I think he can even try c2 here. And then I might be able to hold on here, but it's still looking really dicey. I'm down 2 pawns, and he's got pass pawn on c2, so it's really tough. Something like bishop to c3, probably. Rook takes c4, and knight d5. I mean, these are all just engine lines. I was wondering what happens after bishop e3. I guess he can take my knight. So it's probably better to keep this defended. Keep in mind that knight takes c3, I just queen. But this would lead to some complications, at least if I had played rook f4. But unfortunately, like the rest of the game, I just played knight e2, and I made his job easy. He goes knight e4, take the bishop. He takes my bishop. Knight c6, looking for some sort of check, miracle check. But he just looks to go collect my pawn. And I simply don't think I'm going to have enough counterplay here. And the game ended very shortly here. I can try and step my king to g2, but that's going to be a much slower burn than what happened in the game with king g4, rook e4 check, and I resigned. This rook is going to get deflected from this pawn. So, you know, honestly, there wasn't a whole lot to take away from this game. I probably just shouldn't play openings where I don't really know what I'm doing. But with that being said, I did get opportunities to get a good position. I just didn't quite capitalize, and I made some bad positional moves. I think c5 was really the critical positional mistake. I should probably just keep this tension between these pawns. But overall, not really a great game. My position just completely collapsed after c5, and I had some chances that game, but really just not my most accurate game. So, you know, I need to take some of these games a little bit more seriously. This one I kind of slipped up, and I don't know why I played the way that I did, but I look to bounce back in the next game. And the next game was actually a very good game. So Fortunately, this did not lead to any sort of tilt. Didn't feel too bad about it because my opponent was a good player, but I definitely did not give my strongest showing. So, on to the next game. This was a much, much better game than my last game. My last game was terrible. Very, very inaccurate game. My last game had some interesting chances, but didn't really know what I was doing and was kind of just fumbling my way through that position. But this game, I bounced back. We got d4, knight f6, c4, e5. So we have the Budapest. So black is offering up a pawn, and either knight e4 or knight g4 can be played here. In the game, it was knight e4. Typically, knight g4 is more common, but knight e4 has some trappy lines. I just played knight f3, develop a piece, defend the pawn, and b6. So this is already very unusual. They almost always play bishop to b4 check or bishop c5 and target f2, something along those lines, but b6 just seems too slow. So I play a3 to stop bishop b4 check, maybe look to play b4 at some point. Bishop to b7, knight bd2. Just looking to trade this knight off. Not really doing anything fancy here. I don't know a lot of Budapest theory, and I'm sure we're out of book already with this b6 move. This is atypical for the Budapest defense. We trade the knights. Knight c6, bishop c3, just improving my bishop and making it harder for black to regain this pawn on e5. Black plays bishop to c5, and I really hate this move because it just runs straight into a b4 expansion, and black has to move the bishop back. And I don't think that's really advantageous for him to allow me to play b4 because I think that's a move I want to play anyway. And now I just play pawn g3 and just look to fianchetto my bishop. It's pretty standard development, and I don't think black has posed any issues in the opening. Bishop g2, rook e8, castle, bishop to f8. Still looking to potentially regain this pawn at some point, but I'm not going to make it easy. I go knight to d2. And the idea is if knight takes e5, I'm just going to take this bishop on b7, so the pawn still cannot be regained. And I'm also looking to play pawn to f4. So, and just get the connect 4 going here. So black plays pawn to g6, probably looking to play bishop g7 and try and regain this pawn, but unfortunately I've just got a very strong pawn chain here, and after bishop g7, knight e4, my position is really just looking very, very strong here. I've got all the trumps in this position. My knight's on a great square. His bishop is blocked in by his knight. His knight doesn't have anywhere good to go. I'm up a pawn. I really have everything going for me right now. So he goes rook to b8, trying to alleviate the pressure along this diagonal so that he can move the knight. But I go knight to g5 here. Maybe not the most accurate move. It might have been better to play knight f6 check right away, but I liked knight g5 with some aggressive intentions, and he falls right into him with h6. I play knight takes f7. So just blowing open the black king side. King takes f7, bishop d5 check, so this stops the king from going back to g8. So the king's got to go somewhere kind of undesirable for the time being, or block with the rook, which also is pretty undesirable. So rook to e6 was played. If king to f8 is played, I think I can just continue with e4 and just get a monster pawn center and look to play f5 and just really blow open the position, and I think I'm doing quite well. I could also play f5 right away, or maybe play b5 and then trade the bishops and then play f5. I mean, there's really a lot of options here. Even though I'm down technically a minor piece for 2 pawns, my position is still dominant because black's king is kind of caught in a net right now, and I'm looking to break open with f5 very quickly. So in the game, it was rook e6 to try and alleviate some of the pressure, and I just leave the rook there, and I just look to blow things open with f5, g takes f5, and I play e4. So not even recapturing on f5, because I want to recapture with the pawn and just have this after e4, I want to capture with the pawn and have these 2 pawns, maybe look to play f6 and really just kind of run him over. And also, After e4, if he just allows me to take on f5, then I'll just take his rook with my pawn. I mean, that's plenty of material, and his king is getting blown open. So after e4, king f8 was tried to try and get out of this pin. And instead of taking the rook now, I just press forward, take on f5, and just utilize these pawns as weapons. Rook takes e5 was played, still trying to get back the exchange. But I just press forward with f6. Really just going all in here. If bishop takes f6 is played, queen to g4 is going to be lethal, threatening queen h8, queen g8, queen f7 stuff. Really, his king is just in super precarious shape. The engine is suggesting queen takes f6, but at the very least I can take back with the rook and win the queen. But bishop h8 is also another suggestion, but that's kind of a miserable move to play. Here I can once again look to play something like queen g4, queen c2, queen d3. I really don't even have to rush here. Black is kind of stuck. This bishop's not really doing anything. This rook is stuck in the corner. This queen can't really get in the game very easily. This rook is under fire, so I really just have all of the trumps in this position. I really dominate this bishop in the corner if he can't take on f6. So, I think black's position is in serious trouble here. In the game, it was bishop takes f6, and I played bishop takes e5. More accurate would have been queen g4, and then look to play queen g8 check. After something like queen g4, I think king to e7 might be one of the only moves. Play king e7 and then probably sack the exchange again and just lure the king out, and there's got to be some form of mating net coming. But instead, I saw a kind of straightforward simplification that might not be as winning, but I saw it through. So I saw bishop takes e5. This bishop is pinned, so you have to take with the knight. And then I saw bishop takes b7, rook takes b7, queen to d5. So I'm threatening the rook. I'm also threatening queen takes e5, taking advantage of this pin. So black is kind of limited with what he can do here. Knight to c6 tries to deal with this issue, but then rook takes f6, and rook over to f1 is coming. So queen takes f6, rook f1. I kind of saw all this and was like, I didn't want to overcomplicate anything because I knew this would be a very straightforward win. And then we played a couple more moves, and then the game was over shortly. I gave a bunch of checks and danced around a little bit. Didn't have a lot of time on my clock. Probably made some slight inaccuracies, but eventually was able to convert after queen takes c6, knight takes c6, and queen. And then the game was over. But pretty good game. I thought it was a good attacking game. It was a good bounce back game compared to my last game. But really just starting from this knight takes f7 and then just blowing open the whole king side, not being afraid to give up material and just get at the king. Not really a whole lot else to say. It was a pretty solid attacking game, and it really stemmed from my opponent's kind of inferior opening. I think b6 is not the way that you should be playing these positions. I think you need to play more actively with bishop c5, bishop b4 check. And then I think you also have to reserve the right to play a5, rook a6, and try and swing the rook over. And I don't think fianchettoing the bishop here is really the best way to go about things. But overall, pretty good game and a good way to bounce back from my previous loss. And I will see you guys in the next video.